Observation 1 of the resolution analysis. The East Point resolution, the United States federal government should significantly increase its provision of disease monitoring and treatment to South Sudan. These want to adhere to the standards of the Parliamentary to be an ethics policy debate, which is key to understanding policy education. We also reserve the right to leverage the plan exits of representation and also reserve the right to contest whether the construction of an benefit is the East Point here. The whole definition from the resolution of intentionally defined observation to the inherency. The first argument here is that the funding for the USAID neglected tropical disease program has been rocky in the status quo was slashed from 2013 to 67 million, which is a 25% decrease. And the second argument here is that in 2014 is has South Sudan under the program, but South Sudan is facing a massive health crisis, and the status quo is requested funding efforts of $64.5 million from the international community. That's the plan text.
The United States federal government will increase its provision of disease monitoring and treatment in South Sudan by increasing its contribution to USAID's neglected tropical disease program in South Sudan by $64.5 million. Yeah. Salted.
The first argument here is the neglected tropical disease programs are absolutely key to the status quo because South Sudan has called for international aid on this specific issue because it cripples the social infrastructure of South Sudan. The second argument here is the neglected tropical disease are a unique form of stigma in South Sudan, which means that this is absolutely key to solving for oppression. The third argument here is the United States is only one that can do it because of the mass drug administration technology and also has the most experience and the smallest malpractice rates. Advantage one. The case point of the meeting's first argument here is there are massive outbreaks of NPTE, which are prevalent in Africa, and diseases like lymphatic filariasis, and leprosy, and Chagas disease, and urban blindness are absolutely massive in the status quo. The second argument here is that South Sudan has had no functional healthcare system in the status quo and is unable to treat these diseases. The third argument here is that South Sudan is on the brink right now because civil unrest is happening and the conflict creates a unique public health crisis because it divides the population by sick and unsick bodies. The fourth argument here is that hundreds of thousands of people are ill and the deteriorating health conditions put millions of people at risk. These are one of the insolvency. The first argument of insolvency is that NTE programs have been wildly successful. In the past, they led to the wide-scale donations by private pharmaceutical companies as well, over $3.1 billion. The second argument here is that 584.6 million treatments have been administered in other countries, which is no reason as to why they can't be administered in South Sudan. The third argument here is that over 1 million people in South Sudan would be targeted for treatment. The fourth argument is that the number of strategies were successful in controlling and eliminating NTEs. For example, as drug administration, which can only be done by the United States at community level. Control can deliver service as little as $0.25 to $0.50 per year, quarter to 2 quarters. Sees point the impact. The first argument here is that is a rampant thing that's happening in South Sudan. There's a world where hundreds of people are dying by the week. That's the reason as why the only the planet's unique chance of solvency. The second argument here is that happening in the status quo. The division of people between sick and unsick bodies is a reason as to why there's no way for them to organically rebuild because they don't have the material preconditions necessary to do so, which means the United States is to be integral to being able to solve for this. The third argument here is systemic violence. Systemic violence is happening in a world where the transmission of diseases means that people act violently against the people who they consider to be quote-unquote disease, which is always going to be an issue. The fourth argument here is this is a precondition for organic rebuilding because it's key to solve for regional conflict, and when it is the key to solve for regional conflict, which is the root cause of resentment towards the United States, that means it is also key to solve resentment against the United States. Advantage 2 is smart power. The ASA point is the first argument of soft power in the United States, not where it needs to be in the status quo. The ASA point is the United States has pulled out troops from Afghanistan and Iraq, and we have pulled out the final 33 troops pulled, and Canada has confirmed that the 2014 withdrawal deadline is going to be happening. The ASA point here is the United States has shown a lack of initiative in international conflict recently, specifically with humanitarian concerns in Sankaku, Mali, and Syria. The ASA point here is the United States soft power is intrinsically linked to geopolitics, which means the humanitarian operations in Africa serve hegemony over the area. The ASA point here is the resource exploitation by China in Africa is inevitable without the United States' smart power. The ASA point is the least first argument that United States aid is absolutely key to smart power. The ASA point here is the use of soft power resources is the key to getting allies abroad. The ASA point is also that the United States is uniquely able to do this because of the advantages in science and technology. The ASA point here is the aid programs increase in legitimacy of the United States among foreign countries, and the ASA point here is the aid gives the United States political credibility, the United Nations and NATO, etc. The ASA point here that is key to establishing military bases abroad. For example, intervention was only possible in Afghanistan because of our basic rights and Uzbekistan, which were gained in soft power and aid. The ASA point here is the only reason as why we were able to have a no-fly zone in 2011 in Libya was because of the flyover rights in Libya, which were because of soft power relationships between the United States, Turkey, and the EU. This is one of the impacts. The first argument is smart power is going to be absolutely key to nuclear checks back from proxy wars and the wars exploitation by other states, which collapses West Germany. The ASA point here is at the time since the Soviet collapse, we have had the least wars in recorded history, which is probably a unique reason why the United States had a unipolar power is going to be absolutely key. The ASA point here is the United States expansionism checks back other kind of expansion from other countries, which means that they'll never be able to get into the places where they would have the proxy wars. The ASA point here, the hedge is key to nuclear deproliferation and North Korea. That's most likely a place for nuclear conflagration, which means the unipolar action is absolutely key. The ASA point here, the hard and soft power is also key to United States negotiations on human rights because unipolar power is necessary for the United States to say that what other countries are doing to their people are necessarily messed up. The ASA point here is that it is not a question of power, but it is a prior question of what power behavior has the best chance of success, which means at the end of the round, that is how we evaluate the round. Under view. Our interpretation is that you should evaluate the hypothetical consequences of passing plans versus any competitive policy option over the status quo. Our interpretation is that you should evaluate the hypothetical consequences of passing a plan versus any competitive policy option over the status quo. The first argument here is that discourse or representations are always going to be infinitely regressive, so you can never make a decision as to whether what representations are going to be able to come first. The second argument is that we are all part of the political community, which means that our discussions still end up as policy. So the question is, what kind of policy would I be able to serve our interests best? The third argument here is that this is key to understanding other kind of factors, because the way by which policy making education allows us to understand the way that our policies affect other people, the way by which we craft better policies in the future. The fourth argument here is that it's inevitably our arguments in this round will inevitably carry into the political space. It is just a question of how our education is able to shape the trajectory of what we do in the future. Anything else?
Their framework or underview of advantage 2, advantage 1.
Go on and then.
Yeah. Case.
It's framework advantage 2, advantage 1. The one first.
Yeah.
Everybody ready? First, the Declaration of Independence. The first argument is debate is game competing ideologies endorsed by Judge Giddens. The debate is game competing ideologies endorsed by Judge Arguments that be 100% your offices. We're not competing insofar as when and to the benefits they should be endorsed. The most benefit for the second argument is that we got to rather loose for you. That will only be arguments insofar as I'm talking about the imagination from the actual implications or the implementation of that affirmative. It means you only can evaluate the hypothetical implications of imagining the affirmative versus the imagining the alternative. Or something based on second argument is that I'll give you the second argument is that American states that American hegemony is the unipolar leader of the international community is good. The status quo argument is that it's due rules which rather beneficial in the international sphere. If you want first argument is resources argument that it's only a finite amount of land, food, water, and everything. People are always competing for these types of resources in order to make these agreements that act rational self-interest all the time. The second argument is borders all over the international community. There are borders that are trying to protect certain areas. That means that their stabilization of security inside those areas that they states will make sure that they lose remain secure routines that they have for themselves just because of the geopolitical location. Third is the human nature. Even if you went to some arguments about decline of realism, the status quo, always worries for some countries like Japan, Germany, as well as the United Kingdom, which there was a decline of the unipolar hegemony. The results that increase in realism laws which dictate the international community. The third argument is enough arguments that we are tired of liberal chamber that we exist in that. So the debate community is always full of a bunch of liberal ninnies who want to talk about self-assuring ideas. They are already agreeing upon. No one's going to say that racism or sexism or any of those things is bad, but you can't talk about hegemony because then you are banned as one of those people anymore. Our arguments that we are representing the liberal chamber is uniquely important. The second argument is that interventionism is already occurring. It's a step starting to stand. Well, we will actually that the first day of this term we told us someone wouldn't even vote for us because they didn't agree with our stance with realism that she refused to even endorse. When we told the NPTE board that there is someone voting against us based on political ideology, which is a reason why they're not supposed to be able to vote, they said no, you are able to. There was an indication that the community saying that no, you can be pushed against as long as you're reading an argument like ours. Next is the Civil War. The first argument that complaints with the debate community is uniquely unimportant. There are a group of topic areas which have a unique implication that discusses realism in the debate community. The China topic is the only one talking about the way in which we can have a realist implication on the international community, the way in which we would engage that. They propose a bunch of liberal leaning topics that indicate that we should possibly engage with the Afghan war, or we should talk about alternative energies to pollution set. Having rules conversation means that twice the problem is late second argument that the plan says for the source of the PMC, pretty much crossed by all the union starting from the second indicates they believe the United States is not able to function in the status quo, which indicates that the United States will be distrusted. We will take an better argument to that later. The next argument is strategic flexibility. The United Nations mission in South Sudan has an agreement with the member nations that says that they're able to say to do with the forces that exist therein. All foreign operations they're able to operate in some capacity, which means that the placing of the United States troops or the United States aid means that they're constrained the foreign diplomatic standards of the United Nations that are there, which means that we have to conform to international norms in order to deploy ourselves in the international community. The list endorsement of this indicates that we found multilateralism like the United Nations. Fourth argument is that the affirmative sacrifices the political power and resources arguments in South Sudan has 75% of the wealth in the area that China is already isolated. This is an area of importance. Instead, they could say, well, the things like focusing on disease monitoring, not the resources, both political power, wealth in this area, the affirmative logic stems from the prioritization of human rights concerns or humanitarian concerns and insofar as diseases. C arguments, the impact. First argument, small-scale conflicts. Countries like Israel and Iran as well as China, Taiwan, are opportunity for having war in the status quo as a result of the United States and Germany supporting one of those sides because they're fearful of the United States lighting up one side like the 4th of July. Russia is supportive of Iran as well as China is supportive of itself, obviously, and these means there's massive global powers that are focused in these areas of the world in which these conflicts will break out or roll out, or massive escalation, risk, nuclear war, or that these are massive powers that when conflict with one another means the nuclear weapons are obligated in order to win the fight in the long term. It's trying to drive and because realism trying to kill on top of means that risk extinction or at least death of billions of people as a result. The second argument is value lies simple massive hierarchy of needs. You must be safe before you think about anything else working today. So security that blanket that need for the United States federal government is creating laws for us to evaluate other things that other than that you should evaluate as everyone is dead docile bodies today or not able to access the United States. Germany, third is still organized countries like Russia and China are striving in status quo and they are the only global powers that even have the propensity to do so. Orders that when they feel things, they feel worse things like human rights violations through their policies like one-child policy or the way in which they align with LGBT individuals indicate their film would be a family risk. Secondly, orders that they would go war resources in areas like Chicago, Islands, well, the arch which indicates that a resource war which would be a zero-sum conflict is key to your survival breakout and probably risk nuclear stations we talked about with great power wars previously. That's the plain text. I'll keep the problem. Vote for Mckendree NT as an act of solidarity with the American hegemon. Vote for Mckendree NT as an act of solidarity with the American hegemon. First argument, solidarity is key arguments that we posit ourselves in debate means far away, and which we say that we will always be the truth, and we defend the truth and justice in the American way in debate, which means they made the statements to our people, nobody knows the teams American we are saying solidarity. Second argument is that they say that Germany, which we defend our obligations to the United States government is able to work with other countries all the time and engage it, but there is a little more hegemonic order that exists as far as rule-based orders, but that makes the United States and Germany on top orders that are there, but being maintenance of this kind of sport. The next argument is that here now is uniquely important arguments first, that we're literally at the top of the mountain, screaming to the high heavens, how great America is, which means that it's probably going to mean that massive amounts of momentum, as well as the plain text. These arguments nationally is an important time for a statement to be made about what the debate community should be doing. Warrior states as well as House and our examples of that team. So you stand against the debate. There was a massive push towards recognition of things that had caused concrete benefits or change some capacity. Only the echo chambers made it worse. Additionally, to stress the only things that threats Hegemony and things like our basic rights as well as our ability to power project only goes by countries don't trust or actors don't trust us as a country means that would lead to push away next arguments as the balance is key or arguments under the realist principles that they balance of limited resource whoever retains the most who is the strongest argument that we're going to risk most should always vote for a vote or the alternative to that back to your question quickly.
Yeah, back on the fiat exclusory, not implications argument. So when we say that we have the implications like being mass recognition, how is that not talking about the implications of policy?
You don't have an implication to you imagining the affirmative argument.
Framework first argument, you talk about hypothetical policy arguments or the evidence regarding cross-class argument with you, not an argument as far as the way in which the big is able to ripple say it ripples in some capacity that ideology not that the apprentices actually have between you can't access the opposite in addition to me or not saying it's competitive just compare the ideology of the affirmative and the impacts of it versus the affirmative not reason why it's competitive whatsoever or in addition to arguments policy education are resolved by things like topic areas that exist in the NPTE which means that people are able to learn if they want to research and education or all your curse additional arguments about the Germany from results of education because in terms of international relations the most important discussion actually has to happen is about American hegemony because it is literally the most broad impact of the international community as well as it is the most powerful which means that giving the United States power according to the alternatives is the most important. Managed to. First, we're going to be jacks for our power totality and cross-power, so the way in which the United States is able to avoid Germany as well as the question of resource scarcity. Also, cross-power 100% arguments, but the way in which we can see similar things. Additionally, South Sudan is a relatively unimportant country in terms of international relations. It's not a country of international. It's not a country of international community that has massive counter in regards to international community. Probably just has a ripple over effect of smart power in smart ways with the way which is possible throughout the rest of the world. Additionally, arguments that Germany ties, despite all the arguments about soft power, you know, an intuitive argument about why smart power is trust the arguments that the military powers of the United States have means people always believe that our smart powers are the addition people are indicated that the world is being against the United States words that is not as preferable to having no United States whatsoever. The international community is always more stable as a result of the United States federal government. This results when these questions only distrust the threat to this addition arguments that the human rights are protected now governments in the USA is they're deployed all over the international community means that they will solve long-term not unique piece of impact on your advantage one. Or because the massive ways you only isolate doing that, I see how many people die as a result of these things means the CH absence rules alternative massively outweighs.
Okay, so in order to be case really briefly.
So there's 1, 2. Just advance one again.
Yeah, it could be your Arman's one first, and then it's going to be through Arman's case. There will be a new off. And then it will be the one end will be your arguments starting at the order of the alternative, and then the
Alternate sometimes.
which are forever will be
The rank of alternate.
Yes. So it will be the case in the order of grammar debate. That will be the case itself. That will be a new off. And then it will be their criticism argument in the order of the framework, the alternative, will be the same.
That's why we concede ideology, but ours is a way in which our ideology propagates itself is actually harmful. The United States hegemony stats we're making plans to arguments are going to substantiate use hegemony in the context of plan is going to be critical, but in the context of permutation, which means it's not a competing ideology, you still go from the case of debate round. Also, you can make our way fair solution, which we still go after. You make our way fair solution, even if you have solution, we can still imagine a world which you can deconstruct the messages of liberalism in the context of this debate round. In it, they should be policy options to understand the debate round matter, because only integrating policy options to understand how U.S. hegemony is powerful in the context of military technology, which means we can solve back with the case made the first arms day, make the arguments for why Sudan has a small impact. This is only, you can see the solid arguments would actually lead to massive use modeling the stats for the fact that we're actually able to propagate after allows us to use use Aff Berkeley CH as an ally, which means we're actually able to build a basis physically critical. Basically, we don't isolate the impact of our specific United States soft power within the context of Africa's critical sovereign pride their own. Germany impacts within the context of China, they which means we are the best in know, which means that we are best internally. They say that we don't outweigh, but we want their internal impacts on the world. We will internally turn the keys. We are the causes. We are the instantiation of United States policy, which is the most symbolic measure of policy from outside the data, which means we're actually the only ones that are actually able to multi-turn the entire world, which means we cover the power of the United States. That's the least broad reasons why we can ask the case. You off. Sorry, Bench. So the advantage today, make the arguments why the impact is small, but also classify the argument why we are able to solve these arguments that are specifically conceded, which means we can get access to, the case. I'll do that later. The first part of the United States hegemony's collapsing stats will do unsustainable growth. We point through the Roman Empire and also wars driven by nationalist pillars of the class. Both great empires accrued the British jingoism and expansion. Only the instantiation of the collapse of massive governments. The first argument is the United States indicated that way in the four terrorist threats were created for every single one. Joe Chip indicates current policy is unsustainable in this now, but also
Four terrorists for everyone.
four terrorists for every single one. Joe Chip, but also the next argument is jingoism is the actual to award this to a unique type of group thing. For example, when the Bush administration actually talked about themselves, we thought about U.S. hegemony's power projection of the things. Such a poll wolf listen to it led to a massive expansion and unclear investigation. This strategic circumstance of the international arena which only lacked actually being failure, which means the U.S. hegemony was actually very lower than it was 10 years ago. To recognize the entire viewpoint, but also jingoism actually allows for the fuel of the military industrial complex argument. This is specifically bad because it only makes war specifically that because they're developing weapons such as launch, or the preemptive global strike system, which only puts a trigger of moral alert. This is the equivalent of the offensive that actually led to war, specifically World War I. The world where weapons technology is bad, war becomes an absolute inevitability. This is the offense-defense argument made in realism literature that they're referencing the world where weapons more developed, wars are going to create more likely, which means turn the entire impact scenario, which you know, but also the next argument, they can see the entire smart power advancing. Second, artists follow soft power, they can see the analysis where smart power is specifically key with the context of Africa, and this empirically verified things to counter-search efforts. Now I recognize that we have to use soft power. This is not just affirm the use of hegemony. They will not be able to act there because they affirm unconditional support use of hegemony. We say that we're able to engage with other countries, which means that's a unique dynamic plan alone because actually allow for any soft power approach. They don't capture the stats of links. The first argument, their extreme patriotic nationalism only left. Bushes out the moderation, which allows for extreme. Extreme right wing parties adopting the government only leads empirically. Where's policy options? Because our argument actually leads to political infighting with the context. Median voter theory and polarization politics prevents actually policy change from happening, which means you have no access to the next argument. The next argument is their specific representation and ideology the way in which the 4th of July comes on and we acquire the habits is only a new type of jingoistic rhetoric and appeal to U.S. nationalism, which means it only makes it only fuels the term of echo chamber that specifically exists in the status quo. The next argument is their representations of other countries are not worth it, and the national rhetoric actually deters minorities from joining the movement. Our argument here specifically, the rhetoric of U.S. trade is actually allowed to do things such as the internment camps, the Japanese, and the exclusion of air translators after 9/11 because they excluded this in the terms. The Japanese argument is actually the president to utilize the very important reasons. The reason why we didn't do well in Afghanistan to be black translators. That's because U.S. legislation policy drove immigrants away. Our argument is that minorities are specifically critical of the economy, science and engineering technology. The University of California said 95% actually of non-white individuals come from immigrant backgrounds, which means they're radically pushes people away from people from working in the United States. It's empirically verified. There's actually a massive influx of science and technology. People going back to places like Indians and Chinese. They feel welcomed by the national, by the English rhetoric of the United States, which means there is zero impact art. The U.S. military technology is key. The first argument is actually key. The first argument is key to actually maximizing U.S. strategic planning and that science technology is critical to the property of the United States and all. Their arms they specifically talk about in terms of U.S. defense is actually created by corporations, Boeing, and breaking down which are fueled by the science and engineering, minority communities from China and India. This is specifically critical because their cultures have unique reference for science and technology because it was the only way that they could survive their science develop technical skills, which means when they come to the United States, it actually leads to a massive influx in science education, which means it would actually be able to solve this the fact that it deterres by making arms wide borders, securitization level. I mean, it will actually not. It means they will actually be able to solve our they will not be able to solve, which means it's the internal technology.
Sorry, can you extend the answer?
Yeah,
Educated resource scarcity.
Yeah, so totally mentioned, they make their own hedges, specifically resource scarcity arms, that we actually will solve resource scarcity because we actually allow for science to resolve the resource scarcity. They make the arms to why international cooperation reason for having a rise have be. You can see the arms why software is specifically critical. You say hedges high, this fight hard, not true. Now, past the 9/11 analysis, you make the arms so you make the arms why hedges being used against the United States, but arms and minorities are specifically critical. You make the arms why human rights will be. The arms why this actually solves human rights, but also.
It's not a question of power.
Also, you said the analysis was not a question of power, it's a question of how we order ourselves in our ideology in the context of the case rate. The first arm of the framework, the first arm of the framework, they say, realism not is politics, that's fine. We operate in the framework analysis. They make the arms by borders, and that will actually not show the H-1B visas indicate the other country, and indicate the borders are actually fluid, and they want other countries and resources to actually securitize against themselves. They make the arms to why this is specifically critical, but our arms, we don't deny the freedom of space within the context of this part of our here's their freedom actually leads comparatively more backlash from fascist movement because that forces people in the United States, Asians and non-Asians to work together, which means someone for fascist movement service the United States is trying to go to the alternative debate. The first argument is permutation to both the capacity plan and also firm solidarity. So you use such a lot of the entire off-case position is a huge net benefit to the permutation. Also, the next benefits were across by government with instantiating policy with the context provides the individual level because we are allowed to reaffirm use of hegemony for that way. They make the argument why vote balance and resource and arms that you should vote for the affirmative. And our argument is that the argument is specifically bad because the permutation is actually will solve because you actually work together or resources together when you have solidarity in terms of the hegemony. Also, there's specific way which other countries are important actually is a logic that leads to things such as fascism, which means it would actually never solve completely lead to internal displacement in the context of the United States, which is just stability inside. Say there's a modeling argument of the NPTE and why this is critical. This specifically leads to backlash. This is the proven argument for speech. This leads to backlash when they talk about. The first argument is none of our arguments that we frame our arguments why the use has soft power in the stats. When they say we say use hedge is bad, but our argument is the fact that our argument turns against itself because the fact that we can only see use hedge go prevents us from making strategic play in the future.
Berkeley doesn't let us debate in a politicized space.
But also the next argument is Berkeley actually does not let us debate for a politicized space. Your argument forces us to backlash against you on the fact debate. You make no value life arguments. We saw the value life. It's also reference to say no value life that. No value life forces you no value life happen.
Our framework debate, then our links page, our solvency, our impasse, and then the new law and the app online.
You say our framework leads to backlash, but you concede the argument backlash is happening instead. Means all these impacts are not unique. Means our framework is preferable in this sense. Not winning argument that indicates there would not be backlash. Also concedes arguments backlash is happening against us. The reason why it's uniquely important vote from Mckendree NT in this instance because it allows for realism to exist in debate because we are perceived uniquely as Team America, which ultimately is the A. Arguments you're not able to resolve via your lack of you have not responded to our intervention happened claims, which is an indication we have uniqueness for the claim about what backlash means. Only a risk to resolve backlash to existing status quo, not an argument to resolve this. You say the permutation will resolve better because we don't work together. Our arguments working together is not ever going to happen. You concede the realism level. Your only answer is that borders is inevitable or is not inevitable because H-1B visa still securitizing Mexican borders. Probably indication the borders are always going to do because you also conceded the irrational self-interest arguments and the arguments about human nature, which indicates that even if there was a decrease in realism, there's always a reassertion of realism. You would not be able to win terminal impact of that claim, and we'll always win forever in that context. Civil war now. You say it's soft power now, which is not a link. You have to force work now because they can't answer this kind of argument. You have conceded strategic flexibility argument. The U.S. aid is constrained by UN regulation because we've agreed to do so based on our presence under rules-based order, which ultimately is an indication that your soft power argument is not a reason why you would know link. It's actually a reason why you would link because the UN constraint the United States has given into because we know that there are more pressing concerns in South Sudan, which also conceded before the affirmative attack political power and the reason for human rights concerns and medical concerns, which also means massively to the criticism and the permutation not resolved because the inclusion of plans ultimately means that China would have more political power and the region more access to resources, which would a limited resource realist framework would ultimately indicate that they would have more access to power in that world, not resolved by your permutation, not an argument to be able to resolve. It's like there's a dissented permutation. And extended distrust link arguments. Number two, the graph makes it indicates your plan stems from the ideology that America is not good enough to in the status quo. We would have to change the way that America interacts with the international sphere, which is an indication of a massive link not resolved by the permutation. Your permutation includes USFG action as an indication of a massive dissented permutation not resolved by that yet, not resolved. Go to solvency now. Yeah. Extended the United States works with other countries via a rule-based order which allows for us to be on top of a multilateral world to exist underneath. Because you have conceded a liberal-led monarchy and to resolve all soft power claims. Not a reason why jingoism is not resolved by this. Our argument is that the United States exists in a way that allows for us to enforce international norms on the rest of the world and allow for exceptionalism that allows that makes it possible for us to stop small-scale conflict because we are not held to the same rules because we maintain the liberal order that everyone else is subjected to, which resolves the possibility of massive conflict escalation. You have conceded these arguments the reason why our impact claims are far better than yours. Also a reason why the permutation you both not be able to resolve because you're not able to maintain a liberal order. If you create a risk of China getting access to resources that would make them a better hegemon in that world, which would mean that there would be a massive link to permutation and a reason why the permutation not resolve our solvency claim about solidarity and the way that solidarity works. And you consider the Team America argument as an indication of voting Mckendree NT is uniquely important because even if you vote for the permutation, it involves voting Mckendree NT. You vote for us for the permutation, not a reason why we would not be able why this not the answer to this argument in the MG. You say policy is uniquely important. You conceded the arguments that distrust exists and threats hegemony in the debate sphere now, which is the reason why our performance of hegemony and realism is uniquely important. This is our grad third argument, which leads to a pushing away and couple that with our intervention argument indicates we control the uniqueness for this claim is in the case of permutation. Has no risk to result in spending. You say vote out because the permutation would get access to the ballots. That is one argument, not a reason why that one argument is uniquely important to resolving the entirety of the affirmative. You conceded a number of other arguments on solvency that would be resolved by the permutation. You're not making this is the most important solvency argument. The reason why they would massively outweigh this leads to fascism. You conceded the liberal hegemonic order argument that indicates we would resolve fascism. And yeah, obviously the case in the world where you're making that this kind of group thing is bad. Our argument is we make it possible to have organizations like the UN and the WTO via a liberal rules-based order where we're on top funding these things, making them possible ultimately resolve your impacts of your criticism of the LOC or the LOC condition results. You say modeling elites to backlash arguments into backlash is inevitable and argument in the country's model us all the time, which results in the entirety and us on top of the order ultimately creates a system of exceptionalism that is good because it means countries don't backlash against the United States. They backlash against bad things China doesn't allow the United States to continue to enforce the rules. Impact right now. You say value to life claims are bad. Our argument is when people live in a world where they think about themselves as a constant threat of violence would ultimately be uniquely bad for their existence. They would not be able to evaluate other claims like self-actualization. Means your arguments are only possible. Your arguments for value to life claims are bad and only possible in the world of American and were saved enough to think about this. You also concede that the bill and argument that indicates China would have never conceded power in the world of realist framework. It means that China is going to backlash in South Sudan. Is going to take advantage of the political power given to them by the affirmative, which ultimately is an indication of massively not resolved in a extinction level scenario. You've also conceded that human rights are inevitable, that human rights violations are inevitable in this world because of the course of one-child policy that became a hegemon, which ultimately is a return to the affirmative, not resolved by claiming by an argument in the LOC or in the MG, and you conceded resource
tried out to keep down extinction of flame, turn to the affirmative vote, negative in this debate. Argument. You say hedge is collapsing now. This all has an indication there's massive linear offense, only a risk that the propagation of realism in debate would resolve this argument, not an argument that we not be able to resolve this via or rippling effect to be created. We would still be able to imagine the implications of this. You say war by national resolve as an argument. All of your arguments are genuism and war via nationalism resolved by our liberal hegemonic order argument that assumes your claims about the way that the world exists and our claim, and we say that there is a space for this discussion, that the United States is not far-right fascists. Our arguments, the United States exists in a place to check back against far-right fascists like Russia and China, which allows for the prevention of these kinds of claims. You have to put an argument that China and Russia would be uniquely better for the world than the United States. You can see the arguments indicate China would fill in massive peace that the U.S. led to terrorism and group against the war. 19 people die, 19 people a year die from terrorism in the United States. More people drown in their bathtubs and die from terrorism. Not an argument for this argument. You could actually, not an impact of this argument, you could actually go for it in any way. And you said this fuels military-industrial complex, puts people on hair trigger alert. We say realism not only conceded this argument indicates people are on hair trigger alert constantly, always securitizing. Not a reason why it's uniquely important. We say it's about the United States being on top of that multilateral world in order to make sure that people feel constrained in at least some way, which results in this time because they feel like there's a hegemony that can prevent these kinds of wars indicated by our Israel-Iran scenario. Even though we aren't going for it, it's still a war toward claiming there would be a resolution to this. Obviously, Israel's on hair trigger alert. There's a red line every 30 days. They are never nuking Iran, which is an indication the United States has resolved the hair trigger alert claims about military-industrial conflicts because of liberal economic order that's creating. And you say smart power is key to counterinsurgency, not making arguments counterinsurgency to key are terrorism arguments answer this, and our argument additionally is that having the hegemon allows for people to engage us because they feel like we are useful to them, which ultimately allows for us to put bases there. That's why we have bases in Egypt and Israel, because they thought we were useful for resolving the issues that existed within Russia during the Cold War. So we have bases there now, which is the reason why we're able to check back against your arguments. You said this leads to extremism or the propagation of extremism would lead to our argument is this. You would just look at the criticism debate. You highlight us as extremists. Our argument is blue dog Democrats are not extremists, should not be framed as such. It's wrong. And the argument that we're making about the criticism debate ultimately is an indication that we would be able to resolve this in its entirety. I advancing the idea that realism is not an extremist way of thinking about the world, but rather a rational one.
Yeah, so the recruitment arguments, that's what
Oh yeah, and they make a recruitment argument. We said that Hegemony would resolve these types of technology influx because we create better weapons, which ultimately means the recruitment is not important. But your argument about the exclusion of people leading to these claims, our argument is if it were true that people were constantly leaving the United States, then this would already be happening in the status quo. Which could not win a unique impact to this claim, right? You're reading an argument that says hedges high and people are leaving, but you're also claiming that this is a uniqueness to our argument. If hedges, don't advantage it. You say it's about modeling. This would be resolved by USA elsewhere. You can see that these arguments that extinction would massively outweigh in the argument that China would turn back the advantage of soft power now, or arguments that we would, you say we would solve resources because of science, or arguments there's not an indication that science is uniquely, not exists uniquely in their world. Or okay, that argument on this way.
it'll be an overview, and then the critique and order, and the net benefit. I'll be referencing EF, but it's not.
In the LLC order?
Yeah. And then the net benefit, the new law.
Is everybody ready?
There is not a response to this entire debate, the way in which the United States power structures function. The new argument we've made this ground, not the other rhymes for this, about the liberal hegemonic order and the nature of hegemony, the way in which we posit ourselves relative to the rest of the international community, and insofar that we are willing to work with international institutions as long as we are on top of those only exist as a result of hegemony, which means all of your arguments about the collapse due to the United States independence and nuclearity is fundamentally not answered with these arguments. You only have lived your offensive best in this debate insofar as the hedge collapsing now comes. You have lost the link debate because you've just conceded it, and but only to realize this extinction. We will massively outweigh. There's not an answer to the arguments insofar as the fill-in claims which leads to massive human rights violations as well as conflicts over resources, which means that it might become inevitable. You will be highly tenuous when they extend the first advantage when they talk about the resource scarcity, the way in which they resolve that, the time frame they can resolve that question relative to the collapse of hegemony and the small-scale conflicts as well as great power wars that come out as a result. It means you can only vote for a risk of the alternative being able to resolve these questions. There is not an argument in this debate in the end that indicates the alternative is not able to resolve the debate space in the way in which we propagate the anti-hegemonic structure, which means you can only vote negative insofar as that. Additionally, the permutation offense has already been preempted with the litany of arguments that are not answered. They will come up here, they will probably complain about the ability for them to lose this debate means it's bad because not able to propagate hegemony. You should evaluate them as nothing less than collateral damage as a result of the project. But sometimes you have to break some eggs in order to make an omelet, and it is mandated that some jabronis have to lose this. It is needed for general momentum to be made in the debate community. You've not made an argument that indicates you will propagate our movement in the same way, not an argument that indicates that the liberal equity chamber doesn't exist. So even if they win 100% of their claims indicating the impact of hegemony being good, you conceded an argument about policymakers that you even indicate have a rippling effect would only be anti-hegemonic because the impacts are inevitable sans the alternative, and you can only vote on those arguments, framework arguments specifically. Only arguments that are relevant are those questions of realism. You have made one answer to one of them, which is not enough of this debate, which indicates realism will always assert itself. You've not made a counter-argument that would maybe be better than the United States insofar as China or Russia being the worst of you that we isolate. You don't have a response to these claims. Your arguments on China rise being bad are preempted by the alternative. That is not responding to what's already seen. The implications of great power conflicts become infinitely worse in the new world of realism. You conceded this debate. Links. They're going to go for these arguments talking about that we increase smart power in some capacity. You conceded two link arguments that our functional link turns to be affirmative in their questions of hegemony. Number 3 and number 4 about the functional way in which you assume hegemony is bad. But you also conceded the distrust link and conceded the argument at the end that distrust is the only propensity for these things to go. When they send smart power arguments and they win this round because they talk about smart power, fundamentally ask the question, how does distrust function in smart power? People don't want us in their backyards. People don't want us to have their bases. People don't want us to be able to have fly rights. It probably means it's impossible for you to ever resolve any of the hegemony questions. This has been affected out with conceded in its replication of hegemony, not responded to addition to our concern about backlash. You've already conceded the uniqueness of the debate. The debate, the community is backlashing against us. Only our movement actually does so. The extent, the impacts now in totality. You have only made an argument talking about you're able to solve value life. That assumes one that you're able to resolve the hegemony question, but also arguments about basic hierarchy in these indicates this is a prior question, but also small-scale conflicts and fill-in or a functional alternative to the affirmative. The way in which hegemony functions in the long term makes it impossible for you to ever resolve any of these topics. Permutation debate. Already made a linear arguments that the net benefit is largely relevant because the way in which the United States hegemony posits in the long-term edition. You can't win the argument that's key to hegemony when you conceded multiple link that says that hegemony exists in the long term. You're probably going to go for these backlash arguments. You cross-apply what? I've already said earlier insofar as what happens with backlash in the long term. Additionally, your argument about the logic of fascism is only the argument that we're product is fighting it. Just because we like America doesn't mean we're the worst people alive. It means that we probably resolve this in the long term. Net benefit. It's only a linear dissent. They say hegemony is collapsing now, and the impact of this dissent is hegemony. They have not made an argument that says the alternative doesn't generate enough weakness to resolve this question.
The order is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, the links on our new auth, and then I'll signpost on the new auth. Yeah, and then the permutation debate, and then the rest of it.
Could you tell me what that is?
Yeah, cricket. Advantage 1, advantage 2, the links on our new auth, the rest of our new auth, the permutation debate, and then the rest of it repeat. Yeah. Right.
This is a very clear route for Berkeley, and we are running a case that necessarily allows for us to assert American hegemony, and when we're bringing arguments that tell you specifically that the prior question is not whether or not hegemony should exist. We both agree that hegemony should exist. It's only a question of how we should assert our hegemony. That means that the affirmative is necessarily going to be better with the permutation. The first argument that wants to go on advantage was the argument that we're necessarily going to be able to solve resentment. This is the last impact argument that says that we able the only way we can actually solve for resentment, which is the root cause of the increase in hegemony, is to solve for regional conflict. No response to this. They just say it's not important because it's not that many deaths, but that doesn't mean that we don't solve for the resentment against the United States, which means that we comparatively better for hegemony on advantage 2. They basically cold concede this argument, which means that I want to extend the argument that the only way that we can actually have military bases in Libya and Turkey is through soft power, which means the soft power is necessarily going to be key here. Assertion that we can only have hard power, that soft power is not necessary, is a reason why the United States does terrible things, that does not allow us to have military bases, which means that they're cold conceding the argument that this is important. The only other argument that I want you to extend on our advantage 2 is the number E sub 1 of the apex. This is very important. We say this over and over again. It is not a question of whether or not hegemony should exist. We both agree, but it's the prior question of that power behavior of hegemony, how we should assert ourselves, and in a world where they are winning solvency arguments and say that they will change the way the debate operates, right? They are saying that their rhetoric in this round and their movement will change the way by which people are able to access debates and make certain arguments that you have to take some goddamn responsibility for your arguments and mean that your rhetoric is going to be replicated probably in the rounds later on. Go on to the link debate. First argument that I want you to go on to the link debate is the argument that you say that you are not extremists just because you like the United States. Yeah, you are not extremists just because you like the United States, but you are extremists because you say shit like borders are inevitable, we should close borders, and you say arguments like human rights violations are inevitable. You say shit like peace, justice, and the American way, and if people do not follow us, we should bomb them back like the 4th of July. That is what makes you an extremist, not the fact that you like the United States of America, which means that when you claim this all through your rhetoric, then you have to take responsibility for the way.
I think the argument about are we are extremists may be in the NT in some capacity, but that level of explanation about the link debate is missed.
Your argument that we are not extremists is not responsive to our argument that you say 4th of July, you are Jewish. Fine, I'll just say bomb back like 4th of July. That's pretty messed up in and of itself. Let's go for that one. Ready?
Yeah.
Necessarily, your rhetoric is going to be carried on into the rounds afterwards, which means that you are necessarily going to shape the trajectory of the way that American hegemony is able to operate in a very, very terrible way. Additionally, I want you to extend the argument that you said that people are not leaving the United States. They absolutely are, which means that we're absolutely going to be able to play the brain drain argument. People are leaving the United States because this kind of nationalist rhetoric is going up, and this is a very, very devastating argument for you, specifically when Ryan is making arguments against you. I don't know why you don't respond to it. The blog that says that people leaving means that the United States, Boeing and Raytheon specifically, depend on immigrants from China and India, which means that when you make arguments that borders are inevitable, visas don't matter, and people are leaving the United States, it's cold conceded. That means that the United States hegemony is not even going to be able to operate on a technological level because there's no way that you can actually allow for the development of new military technology. But additionally, we are winning arguments in the soft power argument that say that engagement through non-jingoism is absolutely key, which means that we are making a distinction between smart power and the jingoism of the negative, which means that we're always going to be able to win the argument, being able to engage with other countries is the only way that we can actually assert our hegemony and unipower polarity, which means that we are not saying that hegemony is bad. Even if we're saying hegemony is low in the status quo, we are still making uniqueness arguments as to why we are able to solve for it. I think that the case and or the permutation are reasons why we're able to generate uniqueness on the argument. Additionally, on the U.S. hedge collapsing argument, this is just like the top of our dissent, or like the off case. The first argument that you say, the first argument is that the affirmative team is going to be able to solve by implicating how best to make hegemony operate. But the second argument is that you try to make all these no-link arguments that say that neoliberalism solves. But the problem is that your solvency mechanism in this round is your rhetoric. You claim to solve for debate, which means that the way that you see things is still necessarily constrained by your rhetoric. This is the argument that you make on the framework that rhetoric and representations are important, which means that only in a world that is true, you have to take responsibility. Additionally, we are winning arguments that say that also going to the U.S. hedge collapsing. Again, the other argument that I want you to go for is very key. Ryan makes an argument that say that seeing the United States as always powerful means that we can't have any kind of strategic thinking, right? They make a link argument that says that just because we say hedge is low, that is a link into the hedge cave. But the problem is that Ryan makes a specific argument that the act of making that link argument is a reason as to why you always see the United States as powerful. And that is a problem because the United States will never be able to power project because we can't have strategic thinking and we don't know our weaknesses. Going to the permutation on the permutation, you have no response to this. You say that China's going to be able to have more political power. Absolutely not responsive to the entirety of the advantages that tell you that we will be able to solve for China having more political power by asserting our soft power and making allies in the region. Only then can we crowd out China through the use of hard power. Soft power is the internal links of hard power, which means that we're absolutely solving for that. Additionally, you are making the dissent that there's going to be distrust because the ideology that America isn't good enough. Yeah, America isn't good enough, and we want to solve for that through a better form of hegemony than you. Additionally, you are going to be able to make the argument. You say all these arguments about how the United States is able to control the United Nations, but one of your link arguments is that the United States uses the United Nations, which means that there's no link if the United States also controls the United Nations. Additionally, you try to make all these arguments about how the United States is going to be able to have neoliberal institutions, but again, there's a differentiation between the thing that you say between the thing that you say and the thing that you actually, and the way by which the affirmative is able to leverage this in the permutation. Additionally, you say that the liberal hegemon is going to be able to solve jingoism. Not true because the way by which rhetoric is going to be shaped is going to be solved, which means that at the end of the debate, here's how it breaks down. The permutation is absolutely key because only then are we able to meld policy with being in solidarity with the American hegemon. We are in solidarity with the American hegemon, but we do not use jingoist rhetoric, and we also have the net benefit that you allow for white and non-white bodies to come together with a formulation of new policies that will allow the United States to engage with other countries and actually have strategic thinking.